everyone. I know that we say this a lot these days, but buckle up. It's 4 o'clock in New York. We're following breaking news at this hour on that monster $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit against Fox News. Just a little bit ago, we received word of a bombshell of a plot twist during what was supposed to be the last pretrial hearing before jury selection begins. Here's that headline. The judge has, quote, sanctioned Fox News and its parent company, Fox Corp, for withholding evidence in the Dominion defamation suit and said he is considering further investigation and censure. That judge is also, quote, considering appointing a special master to investigate the Fox legal team's actions. Now, the breaking point today appears to have been, in part, surprise evidence that was introduced in court today when this happened. Quote, lawyers for Dominion Voting Systems played recordings that Fox News producer Abby Grossberg made during 2020, which were not handed over to Dominion's lawyers during discovery. We have a team of experts and friends to help us make sense of this legal curveball, including Jeremy Peters of the New York Times. Jeremy was in court yesterday, and here's some of his reporting on today's explosive new development. Quote, the rebuke came after lawyers for Dominion revealed a number of instances in which Fox's lawyers had not turned over evidence in a timely manner. That evidence included recordings of the Fox News host Maria Bartiromo talking with former President Trump's lawyers, Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, which Dominion said had been turned over only a week ago. The judge, quote, said he was very concerned that there had been misrepresentations to the court, saying, quote, this is very serious. A lawyer for Dominion told the court that they were still receiving relevant documents from Fox, with the trial just days away. As for that surprise evidence, those secret recordings provided by former Fox producer Abby Grossberg, about them, the New York Times writes this, quote, in one of the recordings from November 8th, 2020, Maria Bartiromo asks Rudy Giuliani about the Dominion software. He says this, quote, it's being analyzed right now. When she asks him about a false connection to Nancy Pelosi, Giuliani says, quote, yeah, I've read that. I can't prove that yet. I can't prove that yet or ever. And now, just moments before we came on the air, Bloomberg News is reporting that Rupert Murdoch himself could take the stand in this trial as early as Monday. Bloomberg's reporting goes like this, quote, Rupert Murdoch is expected to be called to the witness stand in the Dominion Voting Systems defamation lawsuit against his company as soon as Monday. That is according to people familiar with the matter. Murdoch would be the second witness called, people said, meaning he would likely testify on Monday or Tuesday. Bombshell legal developments in this Dominion $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit against Fox News is where we begin again today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. As we mentioned, New York Times political reporter and MSNBC contributor Jeremy Peters is here. Also joining us, Rennell Anderson-Jones, law professor at the University of Utah and a First Amendment scholar. With us at the table, Vanity Fair special correspondent, our friend Molly Jong-Fast, plus former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Ehrenberg is here. We'll explain later our own little plot twist when you were supposed to join us when we were in Miami. Jeremy Peters, I didn't think there would be twists and turns separate from the jaw-dropping reveals in the internal communications at Fox News. But this is an obstructive legal act. Explain what happened and what was revealed today.
This case has taken so many turns, Nicolle, and the ones over the last 48 hours have surprised even Dominion, which has been reviewing the text messages and emails from inside Fox News, tens and thousands of them for months, and you know, they've seen it all. What happened today is significant, not only legally, but because it appeared to so anger the judge, Judge Eric Davis. And it's not good ever to be a defendant in a case going into a jury trial where you have the judge mad at you, because even though the jury will ultimately decide whether or not Dominion is liable for defamation, the judge still has extraordinary power to shape the case and to limit the way Fox can present its defense. What Fox had initially told the judge and argued repeatedly in court and in interviews with reporters like me is Look, Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch, as the two executives responsible for the Fox Corporation, the parent company of Fox News, don't have much to do with Fox News. They're too busy running the broader, larger parent company. They don't meddle in the affairs of this news network. But what we learned yesterday is that that's just not true as far as it relates to Rupert Murdoch. And that's significant because it allows Dominion to go after Fox Corporation, especially on damages if Fox is ultimately found liable for this. It's a much bigger case that way. But Delaware law is such that it's very hard to hold a parent company responsible for the actions of a subsidiary unless there's a very strong connection between those two entities. Now we know that connection exists, and that's very potentially damaging for Fox.
Jeremy Peters, let me ask you about this recording. I understand it was played in court. This is Rudy Giuliani's voice on tape saying what we read from the transcript. I don't have any evidence yet.
Exactly right. And the fact that he admits this, and Maria Bartiromo and others at Fox not only host him, but continue to host him repeatedly. And to make this claim about Nancy Pelosi, a claim which some Fox News anchors then echoed themselves, it just goes to how much evidence Dominion has pointing to recklessness and actual malice. And that's ultimately what the jury will have to decide. Little pieces of evidence like this just keep piling up, and they show us that what Fox was saying behind the scenes and what its anchors and guests were telling its audience are two very, very different things.
Ronell, this seems to go to the heart of knowingly broadcasting false information. Seems to go to the heart of the shallowness of the claims and knowing that they weren't true before they put them on the air. But it also, and I use this word in the context of our coverage of Trump, it suggests an obstructive act has taken place in obstructing the discovery process or standing in the way of turning over things that should have been turned over. Can you give us an explanation of the significance of each?
Sure. I mean, this is an unenviable position to be in on the cusp of any trial in any case, but it's a particularly unfortunate one in a case that rises and falls substantively on a claim that the organization told knowing lies. So no litigant wants a few days before trial starts to be in a position where they're receiving sanctions and being scolded and sort of schooled by the judge in the case for what the judge thinks of as misrepresentations or a lack of honesty. The judge here was quite clear, said specifically, omissions in this context are lies. And it's uncomfortable to him that these sorts of withholdings have happened. We wouldn't want to see that as a lawyer on the eve of any trial, and you certainly wouldn't want to be heading in with any sort of indication to the jury that you had engaged in that kind of behavior. But it might be particularly unfortunate in a case in which the main question that the jury needs to decide is whether this organization has engaged in a pattern of knowing falsity. So it's a real complexity to be happening right at the moment that the trial is about to begin.
Ronell, can you explain whether this process that the judge ordered is concurrent with the trial? Let me read what that process is, as reported by Jeremy in the New York Times. The judge said he would likely appoint a special master to investigate Fox's handling of discovery of documents and the question of whether Fox inappropriately withheld details about Rupert Murdoch's role as a corporate officer of Fox News. The judge told Fox's lawyers to retain all internal communications between themselves relating to the officer issue from the time of March 20th. He said he would weigh whether any additional sanctions should be put on Fox. Does that happen on a parallel track to the actual defamation lawsuit that is slated to begin Monday?
Yes, so I don't think that we know immediately what this will do to the timing of this suit. I assume that in the coming hours and days, we'll get clarification about whether there might be a delay in moving forward. The judge did suggest that Dominion is probably entitled to some additional discovery here, now that it knows things that it didn't know before, to look into those things before it launches into trial, and that it could engage in that discovery at Fox's expense as a part of the consequences here. We don't know yet from Dominion whether they will take the judge up on that offer. And so I think that piece of it remains to be seen. It's interesting because this all came about as a result of this producer who used to work for Fox News, who has now left and is suing Fox herself over what she says was a toxic work environment. Those of us who have been watching the case quite closely have said all along that she was likely to offer some really important insights into the goings-on at Fox News and an important gloss on the evidence that had already been gathered in the case. But I don't think any of us could have ever expected that there would be this significant of a development, because the evidence that we're talking about here is evidence that we would have expected that if anyone at all at Fox knew about it, it would have been revealed months and months ago in this process. The rules of the game here are quite simple. It is that you have the power as the attorney in a particular case to argue the consequences or to shape your argument around the facts that there are before the jury, but you don't have the power to keep from the jury relevant facts. And it's quite clear. You can see the judge saying that it's quite clear that some of this evidence is really pertinent to the core claims that are being made by Dominion. And so it does have the right heading into the trial to explore them in more detail.
I mean, Ronell, does it taint the discovery process to learn that Fox didn't abide by it? What is the remedy other than a slap on the wrist, which is what it sounds like happened today?
Well, certainly we hear Judge Davis today suggesting that he had that same kind of anxiety. Remember, the jury trial that is coming up is nothing close to the first proceeding that has happened in this case. In fact, we already have from this judge response to and an order on motions for summary judgment. The judge has already decided some key pieces of this case in advance. And he said in court today that there's a little dis-ease here about whether that could have been problematic in terms of him not knowing the full scope of the factual background as he was making those sorts of considerations. You can see that he's certainly going to be sure that prior to moving forward with key pieces of evidence before the jury, that Dominion has everything that it's entitled to have. And I think that's been made clear to Fox in today's hearing.
Ronell, are you aware of any other news organizations withholding information during this discovery process that's this central to both proving the intent to publish and broadcast false information, as well as clearly responsive to discovery?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we've been saying all along here is that these sorts of cases don't move to trial in any event. The constitutional bar is so high here, and the difficulty of showing actual evidence of knowing falsity on the part of a news organization is so staggering that we don't have that many examples to draw from when we're trying to compare this situation to other situations involving the media. This is a unique case start to finish. And this most recent development just makes it even more staggering.
But Molly, there's something shockingly similar, the pattern of someone from inside. I think Comey called it, the family that ends up on the outside, right, spilling the beans and revealing incredibly damaging evidence about what's happening inside the family.
Yeah, when I saw that Abby Grossberg was going to sue, and I knew that was going to be just a disaster for them. And, it mimics the Trump organization where they would provide the lawyers for the witnesses. And
right. Cohen is Abby. Weisselberg's sitting in prison. He's the others who are still, towing the family line.
But usually with the Trump organization, there aren't billions of dollars. I mean, there's a lot of money that Rupert Murdoch has. And, you know, I think Dominion is really hell hath no fury like a voting machine company scorn.
What do you make of the legal strategy that we expect to have Rupert Murdoch on the witness stand in the first or second day of trial? He'd be the second witness called.
Yeah, Rupert Murdoch in his depositions was very forthcoming, saying, yeah, we should have done it differently. Yeah, we didn't tell the truth. So it's good to put him on the stand. He's still the boss man. To me, the biggest question is, why hasn't Fox News settled? Because every day there's more damaging stuff coming out. I mean, how many times do you have to step on a rake before it starts to hurt? But I think the reason they haven't settled is because they know if they did settle, they'd have to go on the air every 30 minutes and say, we were wrong, the election was not stolen, go on with your day. And they're so worried about losing their audience to Newsmax that they'd rather go down with this sinking ship than to make those omissions.
I think we misappropriated you as the former state attorney. We know you are the current state attorney for Palm Beach County. We are sorry.
I live in Florida, so former could happen any day.
We'll get to that. I want to ask you if you can address that question just from a strategic level, Jeremy Peters. Why hasn't this continues to get worse and worse? And I wonder, just to Molly's point and Dave's point, if if that wasn't another inflection point where they considered settlement.
So I've been hearing for some time that Fox is already focused on a possible appeal. You know, inside the network, that's where executives are looking because they realize that it's going to be a tough case for them to win in Delaware. They also, I mean, that's exactly right, this point about having to apologize. Dominion wants not only a lot of money from Fox, but they want an apology. They want an acknowledgement from Fox that it was wrong to report what it did about voter fraud and its machines. They're not going to get that absent some major change in thinking inside Fox that I'm just unaware of. I'm not even aware of any kinds of discussions taking place around that. So this case, I think, is going to be with us for a while. And it's just the lack of a settlement so far is just one more way. This is so extraordinary. You just don't see cases like this go to trial, and you don't see cases like this where there are reams of damning evidence that point to actual malice in the way that there is in this case. So this one is one for the books.
Let me read a statement that's just come out from Fox News about today's developments in court. This is from the Fox PR department. Quote, as counsel explained to the court, Fox produced the supplemental information from Ms. Grossberg when we first learned it. And a reminder on the statement, which is also relevant, quote, Rupert Murdoch has been listed as executive chairman of Fox News in our SEC filings for several years, and this filing was referenced by Dominion's own attorney during his deposition. This sounds like a little bit of covering your what, Ronell? What does this? We to assume that this is just in the absence of anything else. This is what they're putting out there.
Well, presumably a piece of this is what a special master would look into if the judge ultimately appoints one. If there's a they said dispute over whether information was withheld or whether information was simply unavailable, that's something that a special master would certainly get to the bottom of. On the question of the revelation that Fox only recently made about Rupert Murdoch's more central role as an officer of Fox News, there's a little bit of a complicated storyline here. One of the explanations that was given in court today was that Murdoch himself and the lawyers themselves weren't fully clear on that they themselves had not been aware that he held that role. But a separate explanation that seems to have been made is that it was clear to everyone, including Dominion, that it was listed in the SEC filings. And so those are the sorts of tensions and facts that the judge or a special master appointed by the judge will probably need to get to the bottom of.
Well, and it sounds like the judge, for his part, Jeremy, isn't buying it at all.
Nicolle, one thing we've seen over and over over again throughout the course of the run up to this trial is the judge has grown increasingly exasperated with Fox's explanations, with its conduct in court, with its numerous objections. And, he's put them on notice. He did this in yesterday's hearing. He did it again today in a much firmer and more explicit way, saying, look, I may order a special master investigation into this, and I'm holding open the possibility that you could be subject to further sanctions. As I said, you don't want a judge mad at you like this if you're a defendant in a $1.6 billion defamation trial a few days ahead of opening argument. And it's become clear that Fox, just watching the conduct of the lawyers in the courtroom, from both sides, they're very respectful, very deferential to the judge, and they're very careful not to, step into any traps or do anything that might irritate him. But Fox's counsel, I think much more so than Dominion's, at least to my observation, can tell they are on thin ice. I can see it in the body language when they interact with the judge. I can hear it in the tone of their voice and in the apologetic way that they often carry themselves when speaking to him. So they know that this could get even worse for them.
An unbelievable twist ahead of jury selection and an expected trial start on Monday. Jeremy Peters, Ronell Anderson, thank you very much. Dave and Molly, stick around for the hour. We'll return to this story at the top of the next hour. But for our part, we are now going to turn to some extraordinary new reporting that reveals prosecutors have been asking witnesses in that Jack Smith-run classified documents probe whether Donald Trump has been showing, like show and tell style, a map with sensitive classified information on it to people. We'll tell you all about it. You have to hear it to believe it. Plus, expelled Tennessee State Representative Justin Pearson, one of the so-called Tennessee Three, was reappointed today. We'll show you that. Later in the program, the disgraced ex-president is once again singing the praises of autocrats like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, what it says about the GOP, given that he's the front runner for their own party. All those stories and more when Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
It was a pitch black night in the high desert. Sheriff's Deputy Billy Cox drove over the park and ride in Palmdale. Something very wrong around that bright blue Mustang. A woman's left leg and bare foot were hanging out of the door. L.A. County Homicide Detective Richard Longshore was sound asleep when he got the call.
There are cases that you will take home with you at night, and that will last till the end of your life.
I'm Keith Morrison, and this is The Girl in the Blue Mustang, a podcast from Dateline.
Listen to all episodes now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Another story breaking late this afternoon. You can imagine what our meetings were like today. Fresh reporting in the New York Times that offers a very rare peek at a consistent line of behavior and questioning about it across multiple witnesses in Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into the classified documents taken and stored at Mar-a-Lago. Citing 4 sources familiar with the matter, the New York Times reports that federal investigators are asking witnesses whether Donald Trump showed off to aides and visitors a map that he took with him when he left office that contains sensitive intelligence information. Now, the nature of the map and the classified information it contains is not yet clear, but still, it might serve as a clue that it is now possible investigators, for their part, have successfully moved on from establishing the facts in this case to a point where they're focused in on proving intent in a case that could result in obstruction of justice charges for the twice impeached ex-president. Joining us now, New York Times Washington correspondent and MSNBC contributor Mike Schmidt, Palm Beach County State Attorney currently. Dave Ehrenberg is still here. Molly's still with us as well. Mike, take us through what your colleagues are reporting this afternoon.
Well, here's where I think it's significant. If you're going to make this case and you're going to take this extraordinary decision of charging a former president, yada, yada, that's,
Second. After Bragg.
Correct. Yeah. Federally. First time.
This is like slightly less extraordinary move, but still extraordinary. Yeah.
And you're going to want to know why he did what he did. Not just why was it that they provided the Justice Department with misleading, inaccurate information about whether they had the documents. But why was it that he took the documents? And that was something that we saw in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Why was it that she had used the email server? Because at the heart of that question sort of gives a larger explanation for whether and what the criminal intent may have been in this. In the Hillary Clinton email investigation, they were never able to get beyond the idea of convenience. Here, if you have a former president of the United States with documents that are marked classified, showing them to people like they are trophies or in some other way, hey, can you believe what this says or whatever, it leads you down a path where you have a better understanding of why he was doing what he was doing and saying, man, this really doesn't make any sense. It's not like, oh my gosh, I took this home by mistake. I need to give this back to the government. I can't believe I just found this in my desk. It's like,
it's a trophy. Yeah.
Look at what I found.
His son's killed baby elephants. He's got classified maps. Do you think there's any connection to this line of Jack Smith's probe, which is still largely opaque to us, except for reporting like this, where we learn some of the questions, and Bill Barr sounding like he's, more certain than Andrew Weissman or Neil Katyal that Trump will and should be indicted for obstructing the investigation into classified documents?
I understand why people like to make a lot out of Bill Barr's takes on different things.
Just this one.
No, this comes up a lot. It comes up a lot.
Really, just this one.
It comes up a lot.
He sounds like he's testified himself. He sounds so invested in Trump being held accountable in the in just the obstruction prong of the documents case.
This isn't an answer to your question, but when covering the Trump presidency and all the investigations, out of all of the players on the field, there was no one that I saw, maybe besides Don McGahn, that had the ability to move around on the chessboard and had the political instincts to do it and the savvy to do it than Bill Barr. So I would just say that when Bill Barr is out there saying things like that, you have to look at them through the lens of someone who has tried to politically maneuver this for himself in many, many different ways. So Bill Barr is not the attorney general anymore, so I'm not sure why.
Yeah, no, look, it's a fair warning that his motives, I think, are always a wrinkle in anything that he's saying publicly, especially a lot of these comments are made on Fox News. I think over the weekend they were made on ABC. He seems to play to audiences. He seemed to relish his role as a subject in the January 6th probe, saying bullshit over and over and over again, knowing that we'd repeat it, and he'd curry some openness. What do you make of what appears to be the strength and the intensity of the obstruction investigation?
Yeah, obstruction is the big whammy here because it's punishable by up to 20 years in prison. But there's also something else at play here, and I agree with everything Michael said. But I think the reason why they asked about the map is that another statute, 18 U.S.C. 793E, the espionage statute, actually says that someone who is unauthorized to have possession of a map and then shows it to someone who can't see it violates that statute. So they're not just going after him for obstruction, but also espionage, which is punishable by up to 10 years in prison. So that's why there's a lot of trouble ahead. That's why Bill Barr is saying, hey, this is the tough one, man. It's not going to be New York. I think it's really going to do in the former president. I think it's the Mar-a-Lago documents because there's a direct tie between the former president and the alleged criminality there.
And you live in Palm Beach. You haven't heard of any parties where maps are the party favors? Not yet?
Well, Trump likes to be the big showman, right. the boss, the big baller. And that's why he has a big shoe from Shaquille O'Neal that he keeps in his office to show off guests. Well, what's even better than a Shaquille O'Neal shoe? How about some
classified maps?
Sensitive maps, nuclear secrets.
So the other part of this, other than the legal and Trump being Trumpy, is the national security concerns. Let me show you what Sue Gordon had to say on the show.
The first thing I would say, there is zero defense. I cannot imagine a defense for the situation in which we find ourselves. There's just none. There is no justification. There's no excuse. No defense, zero, from a national security and from a person involved. Motivation is a much harder thing to ascribe, and I'm usually loath to say what I think other people are thinking. My experience is that the former president has his agenda, and he will use whatever is at his disposal to advance that.
She chose her words very carefully. That was Sue Gordon, the former Deputy Director of National Intelligence, saying something so carefully, it sort of froze me in my tracks. But he has his agenda. It may be showing off next to the shoe. It may be something else. We don't know. But it's clear Jack Smith is going to answer that question.
Yeah. And I mean, look, Trump has there's always been a lot of smoke, right? And there's never been, just like with Fox News, there's always been smoke. But with some of this stuff, you definitely see you're starting to see the outlines of fire. So I do think, there's a lot. I mean, it definitely seems like he's got a sort of idea of where he wants to go, Jack Smith.
Mike, there was a frame through which we tried to understand the Mueller probe as proceeding along the coordination with Russia and actors like Paul Manafort and George Papadopoulos, and then Trump's own conduct, obstructing the investigation into his circle and their contacts and coordination with Russia. Do you get the sense that this is proceeding along two tracks in the documents probe, or is the only bifurcation seem to be Mar-a-Lago and January 6th?
I think Mar-a-Lago and January 6th, because I think that they're all sort of intertwined, because you have to understand why he took them, how he took them, what he did with them when he took them, and then why they provided the misleading account. And it's all tied in together. So I think that they're all sort of one of the same. There was a line in the story by my colleagues today in the Times about the map, and in which they said that they thought that all the witnesses had been spoken to who could really provide any information here. Now, it's very, very difficult to predict the future about whatever, but that sort of shows, a progression in the investigation. I don't think we're at that point in the January 6th investigation, as there are still witnesses whose testimony is being litigated, worked out, et cetera, who have still not gone before the grand jury. So that was a tidbit, halfway through the story that was sort of like, okay, well, things are moving ahead here. Now, does that mean that, we're like imminently sitting on anything? Who knows? And I think it's very, very difficult and dangerous to try and predict and to try and read the tea leaves of what's going on inside. As we've covered all these investigations, it's just, you think you have some sense of it, but you really don't know what's going on in behind those closed doors.
There was a sense that the Barr, Rosenstein, O'Callaghan sort of chain of command over the Mueller probe looked dismissively and derisively at obstruction of justice as a charging or as a criminal bucket. Dave's comment is that that's where a lot of the heat is. How do you think this Justice Department looks at Trump's efforts to obstruct efforts to regain possession of national security documents?
I don't know. I think if this is another thing here where we're trying to predict, how does Merrick Garland view the world? And, when Merrick Garland doesn't really say much. If Merrick Garland is a person who is an institutionalist trying to reset the norms, then the only thing I can, take away from that is that if a special counsel said they wanted to bring charges in something, he probably would go along with that, sort of following the norms of, okay, well, I appointed this special counsel to do an investigation. They're an independent investigator who has found this thing. Would Merrick Garland override that? At the same time, Merrick Garland will be in a position where he has to decide whether to charge the likely Republican nominee against the president of the United States, who will be running against him. He'll have to decide whether it's in the best interest of the country to do that. And I think that's a very easy thing for people to throw around and say, oh, well, the facts are there, whatever. But my guess is that that's a humongously extraordinary decision that's probably even exponentially bigger than we think it is, and will probably define Merrick Garland.
Is that how Merrick Garland, just as a prosecutor, is that how it should be made, that this is a huge decision for the country? Or should Merrick Garland look at his line prosecutor and follow the facts? What do you, in your world, what is the correct way to handle wherever the evidence leads Jack Smith?
As a state prosecutor, you just follow the evidence and the law. But when you're a U.S. Attorney General, and this is a historic moment, you also consider what's best for the country. And I didn't think that Merrick Garland wanted to be here. He was slow rolling this investigation from the beginning, and he was pushed into putting Jack Smith, a pit bull, in charge of the investigation only because Donald Trump committed an unforced error. He announced for president so early to try to intimidate Merrick Garland, to try to dissuade him.
Well, it worked. I mean, Merrick Garland hadn't touched any of the Trump cases.
Yeah. Well, what happened was he then put Jack Smith in charge. And so instead of a person that is known as being a bit timid in Merrick Garland, you've got this bulldog in Jack Smith who is ready to go. And the thing is, if Merrick Garland declines to prosecute, he has to explain it. There's got to be a report. And the public will know, is that the legacy he wants?
It'll go on the shelf next to the Mueller report. I mean, people have been investigating Trump and finding criminality for 7 years now. What do you think the stakes are of Jack Smith's work and Merrick Garland's treatment of it?
Well, I would just add that what we saw last week was that Trump really had one of his best fundraising weeks since he left the Oval. And so I do think...
Second to the insurrection.
Right.
I mean, like, we just have to be honest about what else really rated in MAGA world. It was the coup and the insurrection.
Yes, and the
after the coup, then was the arraignment.
That's right. And the base. I mean, the loser with the Donald Trump indictment last week was Ron DeSantis. So Trump really killed it in the polls, and it really helped him. And I think another one of these. And again, I mean, that's not what you should not focus on the craziness.
No, but it's part of it. My demented brain is like, how's Ron DeSantis trying to get arraigned and arrested now? Like, just to out Trump. It's sick stuff. It's a good point, though. All right, Mike Schmidt, thank you for being here to take us through that reporting. After the break, for us, you can't expel hope. That is what one of the Tennessee Three had to say today after he was reinstated as a Tennessee state representative, returning to the body that expelled him days ago. We'll bring you the latest next.
Hi, I'm Tom Llamas, and for me, the news is so much more than a headline. It informs, it inspires, and it still matters. To cover it, you have to be in it. We'll take you to the front lines of the story, where it's actually happening, with NBC News journalists on the ground from all over the world. We cover what you need to know and bring your newsfeed to life. In primetime and streaming live, it's your news playlist. Join me for Top Story, weeknights at 7 Eastern on NBC News Now.
Same old politics. Yeah. We're tired of same old politicians. We have an allegiance to who are willing to march for justice. Fight for justice. Willing to vote for justice. In that spirit, which I will head back to Nashville with. We do not speak alone. We speak together. We fight together. So the message for all the people in Nashville who decided to expel us. You can't expel hope.
You can't expel hope was the last thing we played there for you. The scenes out of Memphis today were extraordinary. That, of course, is State Representative Justin Pearson. Just in the last hour, he delivered that message for the state Republicans who expelled him last week. Moments earlier, in a special meeting, Memphis area officials reinstated Pearson to it had become a vacant seat because he was expelled from his seat last week. That vote was unanimous by the 7 commissioners present. Importantly, none of the board's 4 Republican members even showed up. Pearson's return to the state legislature comes after Representative Justin Jones was reinstated 2 days ago. Both men had been removed by the majority Republican, majority white state legislature for protesting for gun safety legislation days after a deadly mass shooting at an elementary school in Nashville. Imagine that. Let's bring in NBC News correspondent, my colleague Blaine Alexander, live from Memphis. Blaine, there's such a sense that Representative Jones before him and Pearson today have a real connection to their constituents as well as an eye toward the history that has been made and that they are making in all of their public speeches. I heard that again from Representative Pearson today.
And I think we saw every inch of that on full display today, Nicolle. I mean, I think the fact that they started the day really with a very well-attended, very busy rally not too far away from here, about a mile and a half away at the National Civil Rights Museum. There was a lot of symbolism in that, of course. It's the Civil Rights Museum, the Lorraine Motel, the place where Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. That's where they chose to gather and begin the day. There were about 300 supporters there, all of them who came out on this rather warm day here in Memphis to hear Representative Pearson speak, to some of them chant themselves, and then to walk the mile and a half distance and then gather here in front of the Shelby County Commission building and ultimately fill that chamber. I think a couple of things that were certainly interesting was that we saw people of all ages. I spoke with one woman and I asked her, you know, what brought her out today. She said she doesn't even necessarily live here. She drove from nearby because she just wanted to support, because she thought what had happened in expelling those two members was so egregious, in her words, that she wanted to be out here today to show her support. Now, one thing that we've been watching, I spoke with a couple of commissioners before they took that vote. The vote wasn't unexpected. They certainly expected that he would be reinstated by vote of the commission. Remember, the makeup of this commission is 9 Democrats, 4 Republicans. As you mentioned, 4 of the Republicans were absent, but also so were 2 Democrats. But he just needed a simple majority. They didn't go into this thinking that they would have any issue with that. The question then would become, what would the swearing in process look like? Now, his team tells me that he's going to head back to Nashville there. He's going to be sworn in tomorrow. Session begins tomorrow at 9 a.m. local time. It's very likely that he and Representative Jones will both be able to be walking into their seats and essentially be reestablished, re-sworn in as full members and participate in session tomorrow. But it's very clear that this isn't over. Remember, there's still another election that has to come. There's still a special election that both of them have to do. They've made it clear that they want to run. The state Democratic Party is already raising money to help them do that, but certainly another hurdle that they still have to cross before they're permanently reinstated in those seats.
Blaine, Representative Jones said something the day of the expulsion vote. His speech was about the world watching. And I know that is borne out. This is a national story, a big national political story. It has also been covered overseas. And it appears that the 3, Gloria Johnson and Representatives Pearson and Jones, have an eye toward that. Any sense that the Republicans realize the world is watching and that their position both on guns and silencing peaceful protests is out of step with the majority of Tennesseans and Americans?
Well, I think that the spokesperson for the Republican speaker was very quick to make it clear that they plan to reinstate whoever the 2 local bodies sent back. They said that they really wanted to it seemed they really wanted to push back on that notion of will they, won't they be seated. They tried to make it clear pretty early on, yes, we're going to seat whoever comes back. I think what's remarkable, though, is that when I've spoken to people here, when I've spoken to Democrats, leaders of the Tennessee Black Caucus, all of them have kind of tried to make it clear, yes, watch this in a person's words, this kangaroo court, but don't lose sight of what led us here in the first place, which is the conversation over gun laws and gun control in the state of Tennessee. And to your point, Nicolle, I think that what happened yesterday with the Republican governor really kind of taking some steps was very remarkable. That was something that was very notable. And in kind of the back and forth of who's being reinstated, that's something that may have gotten lost in this conversation. But the fact that he signed an executive order to strengthen gun laws and is calling on his own party to pass red flag laws, that's certainly notable. It's something that even Representative Pearson himself, in an op-ed today to the New York Times, called a small win or a small victory, Nicolle.
Yeah, and they've never, you're so right to bring it back to why they were there, why they got into good trouble in the first place. It was to raise the voices of people of all parties, all ages, all races who were protesting for gun safety legislation. We'll have that conversation at the table after a quick break. NBC's Blaine Alexander, thank you so much for making some time to share your reporting with us. We're grateful. We'll be right back. Molly Jong-Fast and Dave Ehrenberg are still with us. I mean, on guns, Republicans are on the wrong side of 85% of the country. You know, keep going, Tennessee GOP.
Well, and they've elevated these 2 Justins. I mean, they've raised a lot of money. Their speeches are being played on television 24/7. I mean, Republicans have played this absolutely wrong. And so it is very interesting to see. I think these 2 young Justins really have a bright career ahead of them, and they're really gifted orators. And but, you know, again, people want sensible gun control, and the Republicans are just so dug in on this.
But to the point of Blaine's reporting, an incremental win because of the spotlight is to their credit, right? They are uniquely effective at speaking for their constituents, especially in a deep red state. But also the public is demanding that we do more than the GOP stated position, which is, quote, probably nothing.
Yeah. And this is what happens when you live in a political bubble. You have these Republicans in their safe districts talking to people who sound like them, listening to news programs that use alternative facts if they need to. And so they don't have to see that, hey, maybe expelling these two Justins could create a backlash. Maybe we should do something that 85% of the public supports. No, because they talk to people who just think and look like themselves. And then when they get out into the real world, it all explodes in their face.
We were supposed to have this conversation about this one, but you're supposed to join us when we were in Miami, and Trump was indicted that day. It feels like the world has changed. Has that sort of, I mean, just from outside of our bubble of New York, is that news sort of something people talk about in Florida or not really?
Oh, all the time. And here's the thing. I think there's a bit of consternation amongst anti-Trumpers saying that New York shouldn't have gone first because it's the weakest of the four cases. I like to say it's the least strong of the four cases. Doesn't mean it's a weak case. And for all the people who are upset that Alvin Bragg went first, I think a lot of that is going to be washed away when, not if, the federal government prosecutes Donald Trump for the Mar-a-Lago documents, and Fani Willis in Fulton County prosecutes Donald Trump over the finding 11,780 votes. Those are stronger cases, and I think those are coming soon.
I have a particular, and I guess I defer to prosecutors to offer analysis that political people shouldn't. But the idea that all of this is orchestrated is ludicrous. I mean, people have a case that's ready, they go to a grand jury, and they go. And so much of this, to me, is the vacuum created by Merrick Garland. I mean, the hush money case was basically investigated and all but charged by SDNY. They named Trump as an unindicted co-conspirator. So even on that evidence, and this case, Bragg is the second one to find Trump chargeable. On Fani Willis's case, Trump doesn't stay in power if he just steals Georgia. The notion that she could go first is, to me, an unbelievable legal scandal.
Right. Well, I mean, that is certainly a big question, is why is he? And again, it goes back to what Mike Schmidt was saying, that Merrick Garland is known as an institutionalist, and, you know, there's probably some anxiety. And remember, all of these people who work in the federal government think of themselves as completely nonpartisan, and they want desperately, I think, to get America back to what it was pre-Trump. But I'm not sure that's how you do it.
Right, by letting him go and commit more and more and more escalatingly brazen crimes. It's so nice to have both of you here. Please come back. We have a whole nother hour of news. Thanks to both of you for spending this hour with us. The next hour of Deadline White House starts after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. Hi again, everyone. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. An extraordinary and unexpected twist transpired today in a Delaware courtroom in that $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit that is now engulfing Fox News and its parent company, Fox Corporation. Here's the headline. That judge has sanctioned Fox News for allegedly withholding evidence and is even considering appointing a special master to investigate Fox's handling of discovery documents and questions surrounding Rupert Murdoch's role. That comes after dramatic new recordings were played in open court today, recordings made by former Fox News producer Abby Grossberg of conversations with, imagine it, Rudy Giuliani. In one of those recordings, quote, Giuliani hedged when Maria Bartiromo asked about proof of certain claims he was making about Dominion. Quote, that's a little harder, Giuliani replied. Quote, a little harder? I bet. And now comes reporting from Bloomberg along these lines, quote, Rupert Murdoch is expected to be called to the witness stand as soon as Monday, according to people familiar with the matter. Murdoch would be the second witness called, meaning he would likely testify on Monday or Tuesday. This dramatic and unexpected pre-trial hearing has just wrapped up. It's where we start the hour. Joining our coverage, Katie Phang, MSNBC legal analyst and the host of The Katie Phang Show. Also joining us, George Freeman, former assistant general counsel and vice president of the New York Times. He was also the New York Times legal department's primary First Amendment lawyer, an expert, if there is one. Katie Phang, take me inside. What was supposed, my understanding is this was the last pre-trial hearing that we were supposed to move tomorrow to jury selection. And it sounds like this recording played in open court blew things up. Take me inside what went down today.
So as a bit of procedural background, when you're preparing a jury trial, there is a trial order that sets forth deadlines and cutoffs for things like discovery. And when you're litigating in good faith, if somebody turns something over, absent evidence that something else might exist, you believe that they have turned over this information in good faith. Discovery cutoffs, Nicolle, they are far enough in advance of a trial date so that you can be duly prepared for anything and everything that comes your way. There is no, quote, trial by ambush in any jurisdiction across the United States. So in this particular instance, to have recordings, which I think are more than damning in this case, email correspondence, and other evidence that was not timely disclosed. From what we understand, Dominion's lawyers are getting these things in terms of evidence from Fox turned over a week before trial is supposed to begin. It creates a serious quagmire for Dominion. What do? The judge has said, if you want to redepose Maria Bartiromo, you can. We're going to force Fox to turn her over in terms of making herself available. We'll make Fox tee up all the money to cover any of the attendant fees and costs that come from you having to do it at the last minute. But if you're in Dominion's shoes, this is a $1.6 billion plus lawsuit. Do you now delay going to trial next week after all of this trial prep, or do you bite the bullet and move forward? I think it's a critical problem as well for Fox's lawyers. The judge in this case flat out saying that omission is a lie, and he has a problem with the lawyers for Fox. And so not only is there a trial readiness consideration on Dominion's side, but now if you're Fox News, you're looking at the fact that you've got lawyers representing you going into a jury trial when a judge doesn't believe that your lawyers are credible. So I think on both sides, they have a lot to consider, and maybe it includes a settlement.
I mean, Katie, the only reason this tape was revealed is because one of the witnesses who was previously a Fox witness is now suing Fox. So she's a Dominion witness. Abby Grossberg shared it with them. How do you know that all the other Fox witnesses who are still on Team Fox aren't also hiding damaging recordings of Rudy Giuliani admitting there's no there with the Dominion allegations?
Yeah, and that's a really important point because but for Abby Grossberg coming forward and what I say, finding Jesus, right? She figured out that she got her own counsel. She's now made claims that she was unduly prejudiced and pressured by Fox's counsel to be able to be coached in terms of her deposition testimony. But your point is well taken. And that is why Judge Eric Davis, the judge who's in Delaware Chancery Court, who's overseeing all of this, he's saying, look, I may appoint a special master at this point in time to see how prejudiced Dominion is, because if Dominion asked in the discovery process for this evidence, it was not turned over. What else is there? So what does that mean? You could get even deeper into, I'll call it the bowels of Fox Corp and Fox News. You may be able to look at hard drives, servers, etc. Because remember, this good faith litigation process means we do our own research as the lawyers for Fox and return it over to Dominion. But if a special master thinks that there's something untoward going on, which Judge Davis has pretty much found at this point, the special master / the judge may say, you know what, Fox, you got to turn over all your hard drives, all your servers, all this information, and allow Dominion pretty much free reign to look into the serious recesses of what happens in your company. And if you're a company, you don't want the other side ever looking and seeing what's going on.
So, George, I know you were general counsel at the New York Times. I'm going to ask you to pretend you're the general counsel at Fox News, and I apologize in advance. But, you know, just from being in my own news organization, if a producer was sitting on a recording of a subject who appeared on her boss's show, and that boss is Maria Bartiromo, and that guest is Rudy Giuliani, it certainly seems possible that shows like Lou Dobbs and Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson, who also showcase Powell and Giuliani and all these other purveyors of lies about Dominion and Smartmatic, may have also had recorded conversations. How do you go back inside the company and make sure you are being responsive to turning over all of the evidence?
Well, I guess that's exactly what you have to do at this point. Go back, go over it all again, both so as to try to placate the judge, but also to cover yourself in terms of doing everything you can at this point, since these problems have surfaced. The only thing I would say on Fox's behalf, though, is that there has been a tremendous amount of documents transferred in this case. hundreds of thousands, if not millions of documents. And many of them have been really, really damaging to Fox. So it's not like Fox has had a campaign of not turning over documents. I mean, what we've seen so far has been a pretty thorough discovery process. So I would, halt before saying that any of this was intentional. I mean, with all the documents that have existed so far, it's really hard to say that things couldn't have fallen through the cracks, et cetera. Although some of these documents that came up in the last couple of days seem to be pretty darn important.
Well, and I guess, George, Abby Grossberg is just an important figure to have been sitting on a recording of Giuliani admitting that he, as Trump's lawyer, had zero evidence that the Dominion machines malfunctioned or had any ties to Nancy Pelosi. Do you think if a special master is appointed, that they would want to make sure that witnesses other than the one that had turned on her employer, like Abby Grossberg didn't have similar such evidence?
I mean, given the time constraints, I'm not sure a special master can go through the entire discovery process at this point so that it still will have any value before the trial. And on the point you raised earlier, Nicolle, if I were Dominion, I would not want a delay in the trial, even though there is this now added artificial problem that has arisen, because the plaintiff never wants delay. Too many things can go wrong the more things are put off. I saw today that former President Trump asked for delay in his defamation case. I mean, defendants want to delay the day of reckoning and plaintiffs want to get to it. And given the money that has already been spent in this case and the money that will be spent at a trial, having even more lawyers go through this discovery problem and perhaps added depositions while the trial is starting is not a totally unique situation. That has happened before in this sort of situation. I think with a number of lawyers involved, it can happen here.
And Katie, that head of steam, I think, is apparent in Dominion's thinking as they race toward Monday. And as Bloomberg is reporting, plan to have Rupert Murdoch himself as the second witness that testifies, something that could happen as early as Monday or Tuesday. Why would Dominion, to George's point, want to delay that spectacle?
Well, specifically, if you'll recall, Judge Davis and his order on summary judgment that was entered a couple of weeks ago, maybe even 10 days, although this news cycle has been so long, right, Nicolle? Who knows? But if you will recall, the judge is actually saying in his order that Dominion still carries a very large burden of proving Fox Corp, the parent company of Fox News. Dominion still carries the very burden of proof to be able to show that Fox Corp had its paws all over and its fingerprints all over all of this as well. The Rupert Murdoch angle is particularly critical because from what we've learned, there's been some discovery that was also admitted vis-a-vis communications, et cetera, that had to deal with Rupert Murdoch. Now, if you put him on the stand, this 92-year-old dude, when he takes the stand, we already know what he's already disclosed. And to George's point, sure, there's been some damning evidence. But also recall, Nicolle, there's a lot of evidence we haven't seen, we being the public, because Fox has been pushing redactions and they've been making sure that the American public hasn't seen a lot of stuff. So I actually would beg to differ. I think there's a lot more smoking gun evidence that's there. Abby Grossberg has it. I'm sure there's more of it. But when you're focusing on Rupert Murdoch specifically, if you're Dominion, you want to have as much of a link between Rupert Murdoch and Fox Corp and Fox News as possible so that the jury basically says, parent company, subsidiary Fox News, they're all liable. You're not going to be able to parse out liability. You want to go big or go home. So you want both Fox Corp and Fox News to be held liable by this jury.
And it seems from, again, I mean, you both talked about how much evidence has spilled into the public view from the legal process ahead of the trial. I mean, among that evidence is Rupert Murdoch's clear acknowledgement that the election was over on election night, that Joe Biden was the incoming president, and his clear acknowledgement that Sean Hannity had a problem quitting him, and that Tucker and Laura and Sean Hannity should do some joint statement, which I don't think they've ever done for anything, acknowledging that the election was over and that Joe Biden had won, not Trump. George, how is that evidence further Dominion's case that Fox knew that the election was fine, that there was no fraud, that the voting machines hadn't malfunctioned in any shape or form, and that they were in receipt of over 2,000 communications from Dominion before, during, and after all of their segments broadcasting the lies. How does that evidence get presented to a jury?
I think it's critical, but I think, in all the things you just mentioned that involve Murdoch, the most incriminating probably is the fact that he said he could have done something about it, or he should have done something about it. It seems to me that places him in the line of command of Fox News, whatever his title is, and he seems to have a title in both companies, but whatever it is, if he says himself that he's responsible in the end for the news coverage and could have done something about him, I think Dominion is a lot of the way there because of that admission.
How do you, I'm glad you made this more broad. I mean, how do you evaluate, George, what is publicly facing in terms of the evidence that Fox knowingly broadcast, and in some of the shows that are under scrutiny, rebroadcast lies about Dominion?
Well, I think the critical thing that's happened in the last few days is that the judge has ruled last week and repeated it again yesterday in even stronger terms, that Fox's general defense, and this is what they've been saying from a PR point of view since day one, that this material was newsworthy. It was said by the president and his acolytes all along in November and December. So how, as a good journalism institution, can we not repeat what these important people were saying about a presidential election? They've said that from day one, that that's their defense. And the judge ruled last week that the newsworthiness defense, which essentially is what they're talking about, and it's a legal privilege called neutral reportage, he said that defense was dismissed, could not be in the case. And yesterday he went even further and apparently ruled that just talking about newsworthiness as such, as a rationale for what they put on the air, couldn't be even talked about to the jury. That really is a very stinging ruling, far greater than I would have expected, that kind of handicaps Fox in putting on what they want to say. Because the problem in this case, what this case is about, is a place where the law and journalism diverge. And that's that you aren't supposed to put on the newsworthy statements of people saying things you don't believe, even when the allegation itself is what's the news. And as journalists, we do that all the time. It's done all the time. And as a lawyer, I certainly told the Times that they have to do that because that's their job. But legally, if you don't believe it's true, you can be liable for actual malice. And the defense should be, yeah, but it was newsworthy, so I have to put that on. And there is a privilege called neutral reportage, but it comes with conditions. And those conditions are, was the original speaker responsible? And did you repeat it neutrally rather than endorsing it? And I thought that's what would come down to being the key issues for the jury in this trial. But the judge has now taken that away, taken that out of the case. And it seems to me that really handicaps to a huge degree what Fox was going to offer to the jury.
Well, as a less neutral observer of the damage Fox has done to my former party and to our democracy, I'm thrilled by that, Katie Fang. And I have to say, it seems that the legal standard, that very high legal burden that George is talking about, has been met in part by the egregiousness and in part by the 2,800 communications from Dominion, from Tony Fratto, who is a former senior Bush official, to every level of Fox News, and that the actual malice will come in the form of the knowing broadcasting, that knowing they were not true. By the way, I think Donald Trump had more than 45,000 lies recorded by the Washington Post fact checker before he started lying about Dominion in the first place. So it seems that there are all sorts of things that make this an historic set of facts legally. But I wonder for you, Katie, as we process this news about the surprise recording, where your thoughts are about the overall strength of Dominion's case.
I've always believed that Dominion was in the right by bringing this litigation. A lot of us wondered why Fox didn't settle or why Dominion didn't settle. And, there has to be some good faith that also goes into the settlement process. Kind of makes you wonder if there really was anything going on with Fox in that regard. I think there's also another important point to kind of dovetail with what George just said, which is a judge has already found as a matter of law that all of the statements that were put forth by Fox News concerning Dominion were lies. And he found that it was crystal clear that none of it was true. And so to the extent that Dominion pretty much shows and holds up Fox as the banner example of how not to do the news, how not to do journalism, how not to do reporting, good for Dominion. But it's coming at Fox because it was damage to the tunes of billions of dollars. There was also a ruling by the judge concerning whether or not the threats, and that's really important for people to remember. It's not just voting machines were pulled from jurisdictions and not being used. It was death threats that were made to employees at Dominion. It's the damage to the reputation for the company, where the company may be hobbled to the extent financially it's not really being able to move forward. And I think it's Fox did itself in. Nobody made Fox do this. We see all of the evidence that shows that they knowingly put forth lies. You actually have somebody like Paul Ryan, for example, who said and begged Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch, do not allow these election fraud lies to be broadcast to the viewers, and yet they continue to do it. And George, in his legal analysis that he just provided, said something that was important: endorsement. And that's exactly what Rupert Murdoch said in his deposition under oath. He said that the hosts were endorsing the lies. It wasn't just saying, here, viewers, take it for what it is. It was an endorsement. And that is exactly why their own words will do them in at this jury trial.
We are so indebted to both of you for helping us understand the complicated and in some instances counterintuitive legal nuances of this. Katie Fang and George Freeman, thank you so much for starting us off today. When we come back, when you hear the disgraced, twice impeached, now indicted ex-president praise on Fox News, no less, some of the world's worst authoritarians, it might be understandable why so many in his party have fallen in love with authoritarian tools and mechanisms. After all, it's easier to banish your political opponents and silence the press when your leader is gushing about dictators. That conversation and what Trump said on Fox after a quick break. Later in the hour, domestic blowback over those leaked intelligence documents. The top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee on why those opposed to helping Ukraine prevail over Russia should not be using those documents to argue that the war is not worth supporting. Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. This is Nicolle Wallace from MSNBC. Donald Trump became the first ex-president to be arraigned on criminal charges, pleading not guilty to 34 felonies. On MSNBC's new podcast, Prosecuting Donald Trump, legal analysts and veteran prosecutors Andrew Weissman and Mary McCord break down how Alvin Bragg, Fani Willis, and Jack Smith might think about building a case when the defendant happens to be an ex-president. Search for Prosecuting Donald Trump wherever you're listening and follow. In life and in politics, you can tell a lot about a person by the company they keep, or in the case of the twice impeached, disgraced, now indicted ex-president, the people they praise loudly on Fox News. For years, Donald Trump has lauded enthusiastically authoritarian rulers across the globe. And last night on Fox, he did it again.
They're all top of the line. Our guy's not top of the line. Never was. These are top-of-the-line people at the top of their game. President Xi is a brilliant man. If you went all over Hollywood to look for somebody to play the role of President Xi, you couldn't find it. There's nobody like that. The look, the brain, the whole thing. We had a great relationship. How smart is Kim Jong-un? Top of the line. You know, people say, oh, this and that. Really smart. Putin, very smart.
Even know where to start. No one called you top of the line, ever. Our friend Charlie Sykes wrote this. War crimes, genocide, murders, not something that the GOP frontrunner seems to care about, but we knew that, didn't we? We don't typically amplify any of Trump's wild rides or anything, frankly, that's on Fox News. But in covering the Tennessee Republicans, in covering the restrictive bans on abortion, in covering the 400-plus voter suppression laws, it's important to understand they're not bodily functions. They're not burping out random policies. They're following their leader, who's following the world's most heinous authoritarians. And we showed you that to show you just how dangerous his rhetoric is as applied from the top to the bottom at the national, state, and local level of the Republican Party in America. It's that message and that firm embrace, no dog whistles, top of the line. These people are top of the line. They're at the top of their game. Literally no one in Hollywood is good enough to play them in the movie. What movie? That is the message the party's getting from their leader. We know how indebted they are to him. It's no surprise the members are moving away from democratic norms. Not just American democratic norms, but the world's democracies have a set of norms. Republicans are not so into them anymore. They're now engaging in authoritarian practices like enacting inhumane abortion bans, expelling political opponents from serving in state legislatures, and targeting reporters. Joining our coverage, former Obama Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes, plus former Republican Congressman David Jolly. Ketty Kay is here, U.S. Special Correspondent for BBC Studios. They're all MSNBC contributors. I'll say this to you, David Jolly. He's such an idiot on top of all else. I mean, he sounds like such a bleeping idiot.
Yeah, listen, it's somewhat easy to absorb his ignorance now, 6 to 7 years in, and question his intent, right? Because here's the thing, it's actually very dangerous what he just did. You know, he's been normalized, but understand even his comments about President Xi Jinping of China right now in the world, in the region. China has just finished a very aggressive exercise where they surrounded Taiwan. The U.S. is on the eve of an escalated exercise in response, much larger than past years. This is a critical geopolitical national security region. And so when Donald Trump, as a former president, says, our current guy, Joe Biden, doesn't know what he's doing, and the president of China really does, that actually has significant reverberations. Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, recently called what's happening in the region a really big deal. And so in the past, former presidents would have kept their mouth shut or would have backed up the sitting president. We now live in a world in which Donald Trump goes into these interviews, and whether it's ignorance or intent, leaves a very dangerous message on the world stage. And we have to continue to call it out when we hear it.
We have to continue to reckon with the fact that as a country and as a democracy, Ben Rhodes, we have not held Trump accountable for brazen crimes against our democracy. And there are some who are uncomfortable with our constant focus on Merrick Garland's Justice Department. But the truth is, when your political parties crumble, when they're corrupted from the top to the bottom, when they call an insurrection a normal tourist visit, when Mitch McConnell gets up at the end of a trial in which he acquits Donald Trump and says, well, there's always the criminal justice system. He can be held to account there. Fairly or not, it all falls to the rule of law to hold the democracy together. How are we doing on that front?
Well, I mean, incomplete, Nicolle. And like, I literally watching those clips. I mean, I wrote a whole book about this subject of Trump and the Republican Party and the commonality with these other leaders. But the reason it's important is, in addition to just expressing this admiration, Trump and really the Republican Party that has implemented some of these changes, they've copied the playbook of people like Viktor Orban, people like Vladimir Putin himself, in terms of rolling back democratic protections, treating the rule of law as something that you can, like a menu where you choose it when you want it, you use it when you want it, and you discard it when you don't want it. And what has been proven time and again is if you don't stop that kind of power grab, there's no reason to think that the autocratic party will stop itself. Like, there's just not any precedent. If you look around the world at all these systems that have moved in a more autocratic direction, it's not like at a certain point, the parties that have made a conscious decision to go down this path of undoing democratic norms and undermining the rule of law, they don't stop themselves. They need to be stopped. They need to be stopped at the ballot box, and they need to be stopped by the enforcement of the rule of law. And I think this speaks to that. And by the way, this is very clear to people in other parts of the world. Dave Jolly mentioned what's going on in Asia. Well, another thing that happened recently is Emmanuel Macron going over to China for a few days, being very cozy with Xi Jinping. You know, a lot of people wondered, well, what's he doing this for in the middle of the war in Ukraine with China backing Russia? He's doing it in part because he and every other Democratic leader feels that they need to hedge against Donald Trump coming back. As long as they're looking at the Republican Party and seeing what's going on in this country and knowing that there's a kind of roughly 50% chance in a divided country that we're going to get Trump or somebody like him again, they're not going to trust the word of the United States, even with Joe Biden in there, without, hedging and going to a Xi Jinping, who Donald Trump calls top of the line. And keep in mind, Donald Trump has never praised our Democratic allies. It's not like he calls Justin Trudeau or Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron top of the line. He has nothing but bad things to say about small d Democrats. That is a message that people around the world watch. And if they see a U.S. system that is incapable of holding people accountable when they violate the law and try to overthrow the government, they're going to wonder about our system.
Yeah, and Katie, I would go even further on the autocratic point. I think there's this sense that we have time. We don't have any more time. Republicans are wrapped in Orban's, you know what. CPAC has been held there for years now. That seal has been broken. They have shown us who they are. And the people who want to continue to live in a democracy, I think, feel like there are other fights. They're all the same fight. The other side has wrapped all of their efforts to strip away rights, to disenfranchise the voters of Tennessee by expelling their members, to make sure that anyone and everyone who wants a gun can get a gun and no one can ever have access to health care if they're a woman. I mean, it is all part of a piece on their side, in their telling. And I worry sometimes that people think, oh, democracy, we'll deal with that later. We have to fight for this first. Do you feel like the fight is a fair one in our country?
I just came back from a few weeks in Europe, and it was really noticeable the degree to which Europeans are looking at what's happening inside American politics and having kind of thought that the country would change after Donald Trump left office. They've been really struck by how little it has and how much the rollback of rights around reproductive rights, for example, or the disconnect between the organs of American government and the will of the American people on things like guns or things like abortion seem to be incapable of addressing America's problems. So there seems to be a systemic problem with American democracy, whoever is sitting in the White House. And that's the kind of thing I think that alarms those Europeans, particularly those who have long looked to America for leadership. And of course, America has led on Ukraine, and Europeans are incredibly grateful for that, and they acknowledge that. But there is something about America's inability to deal with problems that the American public tell pollsters they want dealing with, that is alarming whoever wins the next election, because the country doesn't seem to be able to deal with those problems.
Yeah, and I mean, I think our politics still get pushed through a business as usual sieve, David Jolly. The truth is, if it's a rematch of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, only one of them is going to work to make sure that everybody still lives in a democracy. Yeah. Only one of them is interested in making sure that everybody, every Republican and every Democrat in this country, has access to government, support of public services. The other one is for burning it all down. And I feel like we're still a little precious in our too big, Princess and the Pea, looking for something perfect. The democracy is on fire.
Yeah, Nicolle, democracy is on the brink in 2024, truly. If we see the return of Donald Trump, who has promised to be an agent of retribution, or even one of his acolytes and Ron DeSantis and others, reflecting the norms of today's Republican Party. Look, there are actors in today's Republican Party, Donald Trump being first and foremost, who will shred the Constitution and violate law to get the end result that they ultimately desire. And it reflects what you see in authoritarians around the world. It quiets speech, it quiets diversity of thought. It is very hard anti-immigration. It quashes fundamental rights. That is now the ends, and any means are justified to achieve those for today's Republican Party. And after the leaders of today's Republican Party, honestly, I don't think any other Republicans are smart enough to see their own movement within their own party. They're just tribal about it, which is why Going into 2024, the most important coalition in the United States is a coalition of Democrats, independents, and disaffected Republicans led by today's Democratic Party. And I just have to call out in this moment, the movement to try to run a third party or independent presidential candidate could be absolutely disastrous. This is the wrong cycle. The Democratic-led coalition in 24 is the one that will protect American democracy. It is critical that they prevail.
Just gave me a chill. Since we've been on, I mean, another state, I think, I don't want to get it wrong, has banned drag shows. No child has been killed in elementary school by a traveling drag show. It's insane. No one's going anywhere, not today. When we come back, we're going to bring into this conversation Congressman Jim Himes of the House Intelligence Committee on this and the domestic blowback around those leaked intelligence documents. That is next. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, I'm Tom Yamas, and for me, the news is so much more than a headline. It informs, it inspires, and it still matters. To cover it, you have to be in it. We'll take you to the front lines of the story, where it's actually happening, with NBC News journalists on the ground from all over the world. We cover what you need to know and bring your newsfeed to life. In primetime and streaming live, it's your news playlist. Join me for Top Story, weeknights at 7 Eastern on NBC News Now.
Let me just say with regard to broadly allies and partners and these documents, we have engaged with allies and partners at high levels over the past days, including to reassure them about our own commitment to safeguarding intelligence and, of course, our commitment to our security partnerships. I'm not going to comment on specific actions that Ukraine takes when it comes to defending its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, but we are determined to assist Ukraine in the efforts that it's making to regain the territory that's been seized from it.
That was our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, yesterday as he continues to reassure our allies in Ukraine after that stunning leak of classified documents that has rattled the country's intelligence and national security communities. And despite the damage control, public and private, that is being done with our allies, there is also the question here in this country about how some of these documents could be viewed by those who, shall we say, are pessimistic about our country's involvement in the war. You may remember back in February when a group of House Republicans led by the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert proposed a bill calling for the, quote, immediate end of U.S. aid to Ukraine, claiming that support for Ukraine's defense is inadvertently contributing to civilian casualties, with some of the documents leaked providing a grim assessment of the outcome for Ukrainians. Might some of those GOP members try to use them to their favor and continue to say and try to rally support on the right for not supporting the war? Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Nicole.
Congressman, have you had a briefing separate from what you've read in the papers about the leak?
Yeah, so we had a briefing this afternoon. It was a telephone briefing. It was unclassified. I will tell you that we learned very little because, of course, the DOD and others are continuing with their investigation. And it's also really hard to talk about this stuff in an unclassified environment. But I mean, I must tell you, I left the briefing a little more upset than when I started. You know, you heard the Secretary of State just now, for whom I have infinite respect, speaking in soothing tones about reaching out to our allies. Look, we have a huge problem here. And as a member of Congress, it is our job to do oversight, to make sure that these kinds of problems never happen again. I really wish I was hearing a lot more kind of hair on fire stuff inside the administration, because this is a very serious leak. We don't know exactly what's authentic or what's been altered. But, you know, I've been paying close attention to this stuff since the Snowden disclosures. And these disclosures have the potential to actually change for the worse action on the battlefield. I'm not saying it's going to happen. But look, not only if I were a U.S. ally right now, I wouldn't want soothing tones. I wouldn't want rededicated statements of how we're going to work together. I would want to know, what are you going to do to make sure that the secrets that we share are protected? And I'm not hearing that yet.
Say more about your concerns about the battlefield.
Well, again, it's a little hard to speak with any specificity because, it would appear that some of these documents may have been altered. We just don't know. I know that the Pentagon has said that some of them appear to be authentic. Anyway, the point is that if they are authentic, it is not hard, and there's a reason why these things stay classified. It is not hard for, let's just say, and again, I don't want to give you the impression that I know, what the damage assessment is, or because I don't, but it's just not hard for professionals inside the Kremlin to say, oh, look at this. How did they figure this out? And all of a sudden, we can't figure this out anymore because they shut off a source or a method of collection. And that will mean, pain and tragedy on the Ukrainian battlefield. So, look, maybe we'll get lucky on this one, and this won't actually result in adverse effects on the Ukrainian battlefield. And I'll be the first to say, we are second to none in terms of helping the Ukrainians fight this fight, which is so important to all of us. But again, as somebody who is charged with oversight of the executive, I'm not going to be very happy until I fully understand what happened here and how I can be made comfortable that it is not going to happen again.
So you're mentioning something that Helene Cooper of the New York Times has been reporting on the story since it broke last Thursday, mentioned yesterday, that there's some evidence in the leaked documents. And again, we should stipulate what you just stipulated. Some of them are authentic. Some appear to have been manipulated. They're now in all sorts of chat rooms. So there could be different versions of different documents that in some instances come out accurate and then are altered before they're reposted in some of these other sites. So there is a smorgasbord of things out there, authentic and inauthentic, none of it good. But is there, you just got it, I think, the crux of it from an intelligence perspective, that sources and methods could be compromised. Helene's reporting suggests that it indicates we have a whole lot of visibility into the Russian military. Is that your assessment?
Well, I can't go there, Nicolle. As you might imagine, collecting on the Russian military effort in Ukraine is a very high U.S. priority right now. And it's no secret that along with the weaponry that we provide to the Ukrainians, we're providing them with assistance on other things like what the Russians may be up to. So, I think I'm not disclosing anything when I say that we spend an awful lot of resources to try to understand what our antagonists, what our adversaries are doing through the fine work of the men and women of the intelligence community, which is why, again, when intelligence is disclosed on one end of the spectrum, people can be killed. We gather human intelligence. We rely on people to assist the United States. They can be killed if we are not careful about our secrets. On the other end of the spectrum, look, if we've got some technical method of collecting information, they can probably figure that off and shut off the tap. So there's just nothing good about this. There's nothing good. And as you know here, we've got a pattern, right? We found documents on the Mar-a-Lago and in 2 vice presidential residences, right? So this is just something that, as a matter of process and systems, must be radically improved inside the United States government.
We want to ask you about a story we were just talking about. I don't know if you caught the ex-president on Fox News yesterday, but he described some of the world's most notorious autocrats as, quote, top of the line and, quote, top of their game. We want to ask you about that on the other side of a quick break, if you could stick around with us. We are back with Congressman Jim Himes, Ben Rhodes, David Jolly, and Katty Kay. So, Congressman, I'm not going to play it again because life's too short, but Donald Trump last night over on Fox News said this about President Xi, Kim Jong-un, and Vladimir Putin, quote, they're top of the line. They're people at the top of their game. And then he went on to denigrate American President Joe Biden while he is, not for nothing, overseas. What impact does that have on your work?
Well, we know, Nicolle, that Donald Trump has an adjective problem, right? He called the phone call with President Zelensky when he basically extorted him for dirt on the Bidens. He called that a perfect phone call. So it's not that he thinks that they're top of the game. We know exactly what Donald Trump is thinking. What he loves about Putin and Xi and Kim Jong-un is that they are unconstrained, right? If Vladimir Putin has an opponent, that opponent falls out of a 7-story window. Worse happens to the opponents of the North Korean leader. They're unconstrained, and Donald Trump loves that idea. He, for better or for worse, he was the president of a system in this country, in which the president is constrained by the Constitution, by the laws, by the Congress, by the courts, and that's a terrible thing for a fundamentally undemocratic person like Donald Trump. And what's really scary, you asked about my workplace, what remains scary is the hold that Donald Trump continues to have over a sizable portion of the Republican Party. What that means is that my colleagues in these halls, calls, my Republican colleagues can't say what they really think about Donald Trump because they know that to do so is to wind up with Adam Kinzinger or Liz Cheney and have their political careers be over. And that's where the danger to our democracy. It doesn't lie so much in the person of Donald Trump. It lies in the spell that he has cast over the majority of the Republican Party.
Right. It's that hold. I want to bring Ben back into this conversation. I mean, Ben, you chronicle this on hopefully it could be averted, but on the path to autocracy. It's not just the figurehead, which is Trump, I guess, in this parallel, but it's the grip, it's the fear that he has. That, in the congressman's telling, is as strong as ever.
Well, no, and whole ecosystem grows up around the person who has that grip, right? So if you look at a Viktor Orban, what happens is you have a kind of corrupt interaction between the party and the leader, in the sense that you start packing the courts with judges who will find in favor of the leader's power grabs. You start having a media ecosystem that exists to extol the virtues of the leader. You start to have online attacks on anybody who opposes the leader. You have a common enemies, an us versus them ethos inside of a political party. Us, the true Hungarians, or in this case, the true Americans, against them, the immigrants, the liberal elites. George Soros actually featured prominently in Hungary, as he does here. There is a playbook, a nationalist playbook, a far-right nationalist playbook. And Trump is the frontman for that. But all of the wiring of democracy that is being undone at the local, state, and sometimes federal level is being done by the political party on his behalf and on behalf of the party itself. And so we can't just see this as a Trump problem. The problem is that for whatever the incentives are that people are seeking, they're acting in a manner that is counter to democracy and that is advancing the very same type of politics that we've seen take root in country after country, very different countries. A Hungary and a Russia, yes, but also in the Philippines. Also, we're seeing this in Israel right now. We saw it in Brazil, where they had their own January 6th. These are very different places, but very common playbooks. And that's what we're living through right now in the United States of America. It's not something, as you said, Nicolle, in the next election. It's something that we've been going through.
Caddy, and this is something that you've brought our attention to, fights within countries. We're so focused on our own and on ourselves, but this plays out all over the world, as Ben just said.
Yeah, look, there'd been some hope that populism was kind of ebbing recently, but it doesn't take much for it to come back again. All you need is some sense of economic crisis. Well, check, we're getting that around the world. With the fallout, from high interest rates and high inflation, widespread immigration and migration of peoples, check, we're getting that. Global warming is not helping with it, but wars around in Ukraine and Afghanistan and the fallout of that and people moving from those countries. And you have those factors that are there, and people can populist leaders can stoke those and produce their own litmus tests for their people of loyalty. And I think in this case, when you hear Trump praising those autocratic leaders, it almost is like a litmus test, because actually, if you look at what's happened in the Republican Party recently, there's been kind of bipartisan support for opposing China and for opposing President Xi. And then Trump comes along and praises him, and there is silence from his party. And they will support Trump over this rather than go the way of their congressional hearings.
That's the silence that you talk about, Congressman. We'll give you the last word, Congressman Himes.
Yeah, I mean, I would strike. This conversation has been enormously pessimistic, and I would say that we have to be on our guard. But let's look at the other side of the thing. I had an awful lot of faith restored in the wisdom of the American people when, after Donald Trump in 2016 wins the Electoral College but not the popular vote, then he loses the United States Senate, then he loses the United States House of Representatives, and then he gets his doors blown off at an election. The courts stood up for our democracy. All of the absurd claims that there was fraud in the election, there were some 60 lawsuits. All of them were tossed out, including by Trump-appointed justices. So my final closing word would be, I'm not ready to give up on the sort of fundamental decency and democratic instincts of the American people, but we do need to remain wary and find those ways to reach out to our fellow Americans that have been so warped by this demagogue, so warped. And I really believe believe, as somebody who's still practicing politics, that if we condemn them, if we say that they are stupid, we're making the problems worse. So I think as a society, we've got to figure out a way to have those conversations that restore some sense of normalcy to our politics.
So you just said that your colleagues don't speak up against what they know is wrong because they're afraid of Trump. How do you find optimism in working with people, grown men and women, who can't tell the truth about Donald Trump?
Well, look, they paid the price. They were supposed to win a very substantial majority in the United States House, and they wound up with a 3-vote or 4-vote majority, right? They were supposed to take the majority in the Senate. They failed to take the majority of the Senate, and the reason for that was the candidates that they put forward, the Kerry Lakes, the Mastrianos of Pennsylvania. When you put forward truly awful candidates, and when your ideas are fundamentally unpopular, ranging from, we should put a total ban on women's reproductive choice and abortion, to what we really need to do is to continue to cut taxes for the very wealthiest in corporations, to we're going to deny climate change. Again, I do have some fundamental faith in the American people who will just say, hey, we're not buying that at the ballot box.
We will let your optimism be the last word today. Congressman Jim Himes, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Another break for us. We'll all be right back. Our thanks to Ben Rhodes, David Jolly, and Katie Kay for spending so much of this hour with us.
The battle over a woman's right to choose, global economic challenges, the ongoing threat to democracy. When you sign up for the MSNBC Daily Newsletter, you're signing up to have a deeper understanding of today's biggest issues. Every morning you'll get insightful articles sent directly to your inbox, written by people you know and trust, like Hayes Brown and Mehdi Hassan, along with video highlights from your favorite MSNBC shows. Sign up for MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.